Bubba from NASA from Houston. Doug Wheelock, he's been on the program before. You actually contacted him on the space station.
Yeah, Doug Wheelock, Rick, he's got quite a history with space and NASA. He's been up on two exhibitions, not exhibitions, what am I trying to say? He's been on two crews at the International Space Station, one as a flight engineer and then one as the actual commander. We did have a conversation with him on orbit here that was on the NASA channel, and we were very appreciative of that. Now, we have Colonel Wheelock on, and he is in Ohio, Rick, currently on loan from the astronaut office working on the Artemis project, which is going to carry us back to the moon.
Artemis Powell? No, I'm sorry, that was the drummer for Leonard Skinner. Doug Wheelock, welcome to Rick and Bubba. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you, guys. Great to be back with you.
All right, so you know what we're dealing with here today, Doug. I mean, we have we have NASA. You know, it's great to have it on 24/7. Everybody's watching the footage, the NASA channel, all good stuff. But then the UFO people are always keeping their eye on it, and a lot of the UFO observers believe that NASA zeroed in cameras on something they did not know any idea what it was. It seemed to be rolling along at a very high rate of speed with the space station, and then ultimately flies up, propels itself out of sight. Any update from NASA on this particular conversation that's going on?
Sure. Not to disappoint those UFO fans out there, this is an IFO. This is identified flying object. This is we discard of our trash and equipment that's been put through its paces and is now retired. We discard some of those things we bring back, if they're useful things that we can refurbish, or if it's science we're returning to the Earth, we bring those back in a vehicle that has a heat shield, of course, to protect it. We used to do that on the space shuttle, and now we do it on the SpaceX vehicle that has a protective heat shield. But most of our resupply capsules they burn up in the atmosphere, and so they're completely disintegrated and burned up in the atmosphere. And sometimes we do that in a controlled capsule, and sometimes things are jettisoned from the space station that have outlived their useful life and are no longer functioning. And so we release them, we jettison them at a planned trajectory, at a planned time, and we release them, and they go below the space station and end up deorbiting and burning back through the atmosphere into dust. And so this item that you have seen the footage on is actually a retired piece of communications gear that we've had on the space station since 2009. It outlived its useful life, and in 2017 it stopped working, and so we've had it on the outside porch of the space station. It's the exposed facility. It's like a back porch. A lot of the science we do is of course inside of the space station in our laboratories, but we also have outside a back porch where things are exposed to the vacuum of space and all the temperature variations of space, and we do a lot of science out there. And this piece of hardware was out on that back porch, and we, in a controlled fashion, at the right moment, at the right time, in the right trajectory, we released this, or we jettisoned this piece of hardware to return ashes to ashes, dust to dust, back to the planet. And so this piece of hardware was actually something we jettisoned from the space station last Friday, the 21st of February. So that's what you're seeing. It's a known piece of hardware. It's a piece of communication hardware which we've upgraded since that time, and so now we use our KU band, which is relayed through our satellites, our geosynchronous satellites.
Doug, this was part of a Japanese project, right? It was sent up by the Japanese?
That's correct. We have 4 laboratories on board the space station. One of them, the biggest laboratory, in fact, is the Japanese laboratory. And it was a piece of equipment and we have a control center, a mission control center in Tsukuba, Japan, which is just north of Tokyo. And our control center there was the controlling element of those experiments going on inside of the Japanese laboratory. And this piece of communications gear was to carry telemetry and voice communications from the space station, Japanese laboratory. This exposed facility, this back porch I talked about, is right outside, is connected to the Japanese laboratory. So it's part of that system. And this piece of communications gear was to send telemetry, data, and voice commands from the space station to the Tsukuba Mission Control Center in Japan.
And Doug, if I understand correctly, NASA puts out a blog every day kind of giving a summary of what went on the space station, and this was actually listed on that summary, but some of the UFO folks apparently did not read that, saw the video, and immediately wanted to know what it was, but just did not look at what you guys already told them was about to happen ahead of time.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. It happens a lot, and we also have a lot of these mini satellites. You probably have seen. We jettison these mini satellites that go out, get essentially launched from the space station, gathering data. Some of them are very small experiments from high schools and universities and things like that. So we're occasionally and getting more frequently releasing things from the space station, and normally it's all in the name of science. And some of these things, even our capsules, our resupply capsules that we end up putting our trash in and then disposing of those, we sometimes put an interesting experiment that we're doing now is called Sapphire. We actually are running that out of the NASA Glenn Research Center up here in Cleveland, Ohio as well. But that's to look at spacecraft safety and fire in space. And so once we release this, we have cameras and telemetry, and we purposely set the inside of that capsule on fire so we can watch how fire spreads in orbit, and how we can protect ourselves from fire inside the capsule, and how to extinguish those fires as well. So these are all, nothing goes to waste on the space station. Even our equipment that we're returning, that's going to eventually burn up in the atmosphere, we sometimes do experiments on those returning items as well.
All right, Doug, I've been doing this a long time, because I know as soon as you don't have any more time for us, we will get this call. And so just go ahead and take care of it. You've explained it. It all makes perfect sense, but that doesn't matter. Okay? So because if I want something to be something, sometimes I won't turn it loose, and I'm speaking for the UFO. They're going to say, well, he never explained how this thing seems to propel itself and go upward into another orbit. And they're even claiming that they can see some kind of green something shooting out the back, like it's propelling itself. Why does it appear that this thing shoots up as opposed to starting to angle back down toward
decay into the atmosphere?
Yeah. So explain what they think they're seeing here.
Sure. The orbital mechanics is an interesting thing. It's actually quite counterintuitive when you get to space. Things, F still equals ma in space, of course, but things operate in the absence of a gravity vector. We're actually still within the capture of the gravitational pull of the Earth, but orbital mechanics works. The easiest way to visualize it is like watching a track meet around a track. Let's say it's more than, or say it's like one lap. You see that the outside, it looks like at the start gun that people are out ahead of the others when they're in the outer lanes. And so
I got you.
Right, and so really the simplest way to understand orbital mechanics. It looks like when they're on those long stretches before they get to the first turn, that hey, those guys got like a 20 meter
Yeah, I got you.
head start or something. So the same is true for orbital mechanics. If you're in a higher orbit and you're traveling the same speed in a lower orbit, you're eventually going to overtake. So you're going to fly out in front of that. For instance, this piece of hardware that we normally release. You say like, well, if you want to return it to the Earth, why don't you just like throw it or jettison it straight down towards the Earth? Well, when you do that, it's actually got the same orbital velocity. So if you throw it straight down towards the Earth, it's now coming into an inside lane, traveling at the same speed. So it's actually going to go out in front of the space station. And then if you throw it backwards, it's actually going to go up. So it's it's gonna maintain that same speed. So it's gonna essentially just change lanes.
It's an optical illusion. That what they're seeing is that it's not happening the way they think it's happening.
So if you throw the trash down, you're actually going to run into it. So you throw it up, and it goes back behind you.
That's correct. And so what we usually do when we jettison something, we normally try to jettison at like a 45-degree angle to the rear, like retrograde and down. So that way you can use orbital mechanics in your favor. Now, we keep an eye on it. That's why we had the cameras trained on it.
Understood.
Yeah, that's why the camera zoomed in, just to be sure it was going
You're
where it was
watching
going.
what you've released to be sure it's doing what you need it to do.